for a really long time at this point. It's about almost 20 years now. I've noticed a really different shift in some of the things that we see in practice. And I've also noticed a shift in myself and some of the things that I've been personally kind of struggling with or challenged with during the pandemic. And I think the reason why we've seen this shift is because this is something no one has gone through before. So it's not like, where someone was in a car accident and they came to my office and, we've had people before that have been in car accidents and had PTSD. This is very, very different, and it's affecting people differently. The way that plays out in day-to-day life is you might be experiencing things that you've never experienced before. So people that have never had anxiety before are all of a sudden having moments of anxiety and they don't know what to do about it. People that have never been isolated before, all of a sudden isolated, and they don't have a way out of that, or at least they don't feel like they have a way out of that. So there's a medical component to what we're going through right now. There's an isolation component, there's anxiety, and there's a lot of different factors that are playing into what our experience is right now. And we're going to go over a couple of those different areas that are affecting people. And you might hear something that you're going through as I'm talking. So you might hear me say something about anxiety and you're going to go, oh, that's what I'm going through. I didn't realize that was anxiety. Or, oh, that's what my daughter's experiencing. I didn't realize that. I've talked to her a couple times this week and, she said that. So I want you to just kind of listen for things that you pick up that seem like they could apply to you or someone you know. Because when we are able to be empathetic, we're able to understand at a greater level. So if we can apply something to our personal life or to someone that we love, who might be going through it, our ability to be empathetic goes up. And when our ability to be empathetic goes up, our ability to understand this topic on a deeper level increases. And that's really the goal, is to make sure we have a good understanding and awareness of mental health and what to do about it. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of go through a couple different categories. As we're going through, if you have questions, I don't want you to have to wait till the end. So what we can do is we're going to talk about these categories. And as we talk about these categories, if you have a question, you can either write it down and we can go back to it, or you can feel free to put it in the chat and I'll answer it as it comes up. So the number one thing that we're seeing right now during this pandemic is anxiety, and we're seeing it across the board and across the age span. So let's talk a little bit about what anxiety is. Anxiety is the feeling. So I want you to think about a feeling, right? Usually anxiety is kind of in your chest or your stomach. It's a feeling of not being able to control something, and the fear that's associated with the lack of control. I would say, yes, tell me. Oh, somebody joined. Okay. I thought someone had a question. Hi, how are you? So anxiety is the feeling of not being able to control something, or the fear of not being able to control something. And I don't think there's a better way to describe what's going on right now than anxiety. Anxiety sometimes has multiple steps to it. So sometimes we don't start with anxiety, we start with stress. And stress leads to acute stress, where it's like long periods of time that we're stressed. And then that stress leads to anxiety. I kind of think about it like a mountain. So we've got stress, we've got acute stress, we've got anxiety. The anxiety kind of peaks, and then sometimes we get sad and we get depressed, and then we slow down. And so sometimes people can experience that whole thing in a matter of a few weeks or a few days. The way to combat anxiety is to slow yourself down. Breathing techniques are the best way to combat anxiety. If you implement those breathing techniques when you're in the stress moment will not turn into anxiety. If you try the breathing techniques during the stress moment and it still turns into anxiety, don't stop the breathing technique. Breathing techniques are a dime a dozen. You can literally Google breathing techniques and it will give you whatever one you want. I don't have a particular one that I adhere to. I tell people whatever breathing technique works for you is the one you should use. So the first thing I want you to do is write down Google breathing techniques. You need to have these in your tool bag, right? Like when you're in a stressful moment or you're in an anxiety moment, you have to have your breathing technique in your toolbox. So I'm going to share with you how that actually looks. I, for some reason, have an anxiety reaction to wearing a mask. And I've gotten better at it up at this point, but when the pandemic first started, nobody really went out, which was fine. We were locked in our houses. But when we started to venture out and I was wearing a mask, by about 20 seconds into having the mask actually on my face and into the store, hang on, can you guys see me?
Yes.
Okay. About 20 seconds into the store, I would start having, the only way I can describe it is a breathing problem. Now I knew I could breathe, like I knew that I wasn't actually having a breathing problem, but I wasn't used to something covering my face, impeding me breathing. So the first time it happened, I left the store. I was very sweaty. I was just very unnerved. The second time it happened, I noticed it. I said, what is that? Like, why am I having this reaction every time I'm in the store? I could feel my heart racing. I noticed I was walking faster. I was almost like running through the store, right? Which is obviously making the anxiety even worse. So I decided I was going to, at home, practice breathing techniques in the mask. So I would sit in the living room and I would put the mask on, or in the car, put the mask on. And I would breathe through my nose, hold it for 5 seconds, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and blow out. I did this 5 times. When I went to the store the next day, I put on the mask and I did the breathing technique in the mask. I went back into the store and I didn't have any symptoms. Anytime I'd have a little bit of stress, I would do the breathing technique in the mask and the symptoms would go away. That's how you combat anxiety. Anxiety goes like this and breathing goes like this, right? You can feel anxiety. Anxiety is like, woo, and breathing goes like this. Okay. Depression is the opposite. Depression is slow. Depression is depressed. It's literally pushed down. I describe depression as almost being glued to something. Like you're sort of glued to your bed and you can't get up. You're glued to the floor, you can't get up. Your body literally physically feels like it can't move when you're feeling depressed. And many people spend so much time anxious and so much time stressed that their body goes, oh, I'm so depressed now. What's happened is you're actually having a stress reaction to stress. And the stress reaction you're having is depression. So it's interesting that stress goes to anxiety and stress goes to depression, just on a different side of the mountain. So let's talk about depression. Depression, the only way around depression is action. The worst part about depression is that it makes you believe you can't move. It makes you not want to move. It makes you so fatigued you can't physically muster up enough energy to move. But the one thing that combats it is moving. If you're feeling depressed, walking around the room will help. If you're feeling depressed, doing jumping jacks will help. If you're feeling depressed, making your bed and changing your sheets that you might even lay back on, it will combat depression. Why? Because when you move, you release endorphins that combat depression. When you don't move, your body stores them and doesn't tap into them. When you're anxious, your body releases too many, and you have to breathe and calm them down. When you're depressed, your body stores them and you have to release them. You see the difference? We don't usually think about anxiety being fast and depression being slow, but that's exactly what happens. The way to combat anxiety is breath. The way to combat depression is action. Some people right now, I know them, and they're clients of mine, they're family members. They've been taking anxiety medication for a good portion of their life. And right now, because of the pandemic, they're still experiencing anxiety. So now what they're finding is they've got to take their medication and they've got to do a breathing technique. In depression, they've got to take their medication and they've got to make sure they're walking every day. Before, they might have been able to get away without that secondary thing. But now we're fighting something much bigger than we were fighting before. Okay. Now you as you're listening to what I'm saying, you can apply the things that make you anxious. You can apply the things that are causing your depression. Those are very specific things. So when we're talking about anxiety, we talk about it generally, but I know what makes me anxious. You know what makes you anxious. You may not be anxious about the mask over your face for whatever reason. I was. I'm not anxious about, not being able to go to a store, but you might be. So our anxiety content might be different, but the way we combat it is the same. Okay. Let's talk about what happens when anxiety goes untreated. When anxiety goes untreated, it becomes acute stress. Acute stress is something that happens to your body after a car accident, after you hear that somebody's passed away, after you fall, after, if you break a leg or break an arm. Acute stress is fear-based, and our body releases different endorphins when it happens. If acute stress goes very high, it skyrockets in like a couple seconds, okay? So if you get into a car accident, I want you to picture it, and you hit somebody, that moment of impact, your body is in acute stress. Your arms are tingling, your chest muscles feel different, your skin feels different. It's called acute stress, okay? If you've ever been in a situation where maybe you've fallen and hurt yourself or been in a car accident or something like that, that moment of impact and the few hours probably that follows it is considered acute stress. The same thing happens when you don't treat anxiety for a long period of time. Anxiety turns into acute stress. It builds on itself. So day after day after day after day after day of feeling anxious will build on itself. And that acute stress, once you get there, I call it stuck anxiety. Acute stress is where you can't stop and pull back the anxiety. This is some, I suppose, clinical advice. If you're feeling anxious, talk to someone. If the breathing techniques are not working, talk to someone. If you're trying to combat the anxiety and day after day you feel that it's not working, talk to someone. And I'm going to tell you why. Our subconscious, so I want you to think about the subconscious as my thumbs. Our conscious brain are my fingers and our subconscious brain are my thumbs. Our conscious brain takes its cues from our subconscious brain. But our subconscious brain is motivated by our conscious brain. The only way to change your subconscious is to talk out loud. That's why talk therapy works. The more you say something out loud, the more your subconscious has to hear it. And it has to hear it differently. That's why talk therapy works. So if you're feeling anxious up here, I'm anxious, I'm anxious, I'm anxious. Your subconscious starts to go, we're anxious, we're really anxious. And then it starts to act anxious. And then your conscious brain goes, yeah, we really are anxious. Yeah, we really are anxious. Yeah, right? And now everything's working together to be anxious. When you go to a therapist and you start talking about your anxiety, your conscious brain goes, there might be a solution. I hadn't thought about that. I wonder if I should try breathing techniques. And your subconscious brain goes, what? That's not what we said yesterday. When you start to change this out loud, this has to change too. That's how you change your subconscious brain. The only way to change your subconscious brain is talking out loud. Now, you can totally do it on your own. You can say an affirmation. You can pray. You can pray out loud. You can say things out loud like, I am strong. I can get through this. I can do anything I put my mind to. My anxiety does not rule me. Tomorrow I'm going to wake up and feel amazing. Those things spoken out loud will change your subconscious. But here's what I will tell you. When you have someone sitting across from you who has a higher skill level than you do to get you out of your own anxiety, that's when you create real change. Because we can only change ourselves to the extent that we know how. We can only change ourselves to the extent that we know how. Okay. Where do I find where that question was? Someone had just asked a question, but I don't know where to find it.
Look in the chat box, Kelly. You see on the bottom it says chat.
I don't have.
More. Click more in the upper right-hand corner. Click more and you'll see chat.
Chat. Thank you. Okay. Are there symptoms for acute stress? Yes. Thank you. That's a great question. Okay. The symptoms of acute stress are absolutely physical. The symptoms of acute stress, a panic attack is acute stress. So if you feel like somebody's standing on your chest and you can't breathe, that's acute stress. When I was in the store and I had the mask around my face and I felt like I couldn't breathe and I was starting to sweat, I was absolutely in acute stress. I was past anxiety. My anxiety started probably in the car, in my driveway, at home, that I had to go into a store and put a mask on. My anxiety probably started weeks before that about the pandemic, and I didn't even realize it. So by the time I got to the store and put the mask on, my stress level was already high. The mask just pushed me into acute stress. So physical symptoms of acute stress include sweating, heart palpitations, headache, dizziness, eyesight blurry, hands sweating, all those things you think about with a panic attack, but you don't really have the panic attack. You're just constantly panicked, but without the panic attack. A panic attack is really where you feel like you're actually having a heart attack. We're going to go into that next, actually. Does that answer your question about the symptoms? Okay, great. Anxiety is more worry and fear. Anxiety is really narrative based. It's really very like in your head. Hang on one second. I'm so sorry. Anxiety is really in your head. So anxiety is like a lot of worry, and I call it the hamster wheel. When you're in anxiety, you're just going and going and going and going and going. That's why the breathing technique brings it down. In depression, sometimes you're still going and going, but your body sort of like goes into like almost like a hibernation. Panic is where you can no longer control the anxiety. There's no control at that point over anxiety. I have actually attempted to help someone in a panic attack breathe through it, and it was nearly impossible. The reason is because once your body is at that point, you're past being able to control what's going on inside your head, because your body is now responding. Your head is not responding anymore. Your body is responding. Many people that have panic attacks end up going to the hospital because they actually think they're having a heart attack. The way to combat getting to a place where you're in panic is breathing. The way to combat getting to a place where you're in acute stress is breathing. The way to combat getting to a place where you're anxious enough to become acutely stressed and then become panicked is breathing. There are two things that complicate everything we just talked about. One of which is PTSD and the other is trauma. They're the same, but different. Some people right now will come out of this pandemic with PTSD. PTSD is stuck stress. It's not complicated stress, it's stuck. The stress and anxiety has been there for so long that it has literally become traumatic. The actual stress has become so traumatic. It's not necessarily the event, It's the response to the event that becomes traumatic. It's the reason why, if I see 4 faces on my screen right this second, all 4 of us could go through something. One of us will end up with PTSD and the other 3 won't. And the reason is because one of us will become stuck in the stress of that thing we went through, and the other 3 people will be able to work through it. There's not a lot of science about why people get stuck. I can tell you, the more you process out loud situations that cause stress, the less likely you are to end up with PTSD. For example, soldiers that are in the field, the reason they end up with PTSD is because they cannot process. There's no moment to process. There's no ability to process, and there's no sounding board, right? There's no one to talk to about it who's not going through the same thing. So they end up stuck in the stress. And the stress ends up literally getting stuck as a narrative here in their brain. And that's why they end up on medication. One of the only ways to get rid of PTSD is with medication. Trauma complicates stress. If you're going through this pandemic right now and you have an existing trauma, you may be experiencing a high level of stress because it's triggering the trauma you already have. There are some people that will go through this pandemic, and because of something they went through, they will come away with trauma. They will come away with PTSD. So just a couple things that I've kind of heard that are along these lines are people that have experienced medical issues during COVID, or people that have experienced a loved one who had medical issues during COVID. It's the same thing as when we hear people talk about Hurricane Sandy and Hurricane Katrina. Those people have PTSD. They have a level of PTSD from being without, our basic needs for 14 days. This will be the same thing. Our generation will talk about this pandemic with a level of trauma because of what it did to us and how it changed us. There's a lot of things in our world now that are changed because of it. Some people will come out of this with a narrative about how it was, and other people will come out with a narrative about what it did to them. And that's where you see the difference between PTSD and the narrative of trauma and the narrative of experience. Does that make sense as I'm saying it that way? I want to make sure that I'm conveying that the right way. Okay, good. Thank you. There are also a lot of families right now that are going to experience trauma financially, economically, safety. Domestic violence is very high right now. Child abuse, unfortunately, is very high right now because people are really indoors and not able to go a lot of places. With schools not going back into session, there's a lot of children that find their school their only safe place, and they're not able to access that safe place. So we're going to see years from now some trauma in children because of this, because of the home experience they had being in lockdown for several months. We're also seeing some PTSD from parents that are having to decide whether they're going back to work right now or staying home with their kids because there's no one to watch them during online learning. So I'm seeing a level of acute stress across the lifespan that we're going to talk about right now, and how it affects everyone from 5 years old up to 85 years old, and how those different levels of stress and those different, it's really just content. So we would say that the 5-year-old and the 85-year-old are both stressed, but they're stressed for different reasons. And so it's not that the stress is different, it's that the content of their stress is different. So let's talk a little bit about how does meditation, exercise, and good food. Yes, absolutely. So one of the things we talked about a little bit was, what's the best way to combat anxiety and depression? The best way to combat anxiety is breathing, and the best way to combat depression is action. What do we do when we exercise? We breathe a lot. What do we do when we exercise? We move a lot. So if you think about exercise, exercise really is one of the best ways to get ahead of anxiety and depression. It's one of the secrets that runners have. Long distance runners know this secret because when they run long distances, they breathe a lot. They're in action the entire time. And then their body starts to release happy chemicals that make them feel better. And that's why runners rarely end up on any kind of anxiety medication, because they've tapped into their own body secret, which is oxytocin. And oxytocin gets released when we exercise. And oxytocin is pretty much the thing in our body that can combat anxiety and depression on its own. Food is very, very important. And I'm so glad that you said that. Sometimes I focus very much on the clinical aspects of mental health, and I forget sometimes about these other parts of it. So I appreciate you pulling that into the presentation. I want you to think about the difference. If you're anxious and you're feeling anxious like this, and then you have a cup of coffee, how's that going to affect your anxiety? It's going to send your anxiety through the roof, quite frankly. Similarly, if you're feeling like this and you have something with sugar, it's going to make you feel the same way. Paying attention to your body and how it interacts with different foods, you want to make sure that you're getting enough protein, enough fiber, enough fruit, enough vegetable. The problem with depression, the number one thing I see with depression is that because people are feeling so drained, they look for things like sugar and caffeine. And sugar and caffeine actually deplete you even farther. And so you'll come up and it'll feel great, and then you'll crash and go right back down. And it's really all about our adrenal system, right? Our anxiety is based on our adrenal system. If we have too much anxiety, our adrenal system gets depleted. And if we have too much depression, our adrenal system is not active enough. And so the food can really be a big part of that. So absolutely, food and exercise are a huge, huge part. And like I was saying before, a lot of people up until this point have really been able to just get away with taking some medication for these things. And now, because of what we're going through, you have to do those extra things if you're experiencing anxiety and depression. So thank you for that question. Let's talk a little bit about these things throughout the lifespan. So my practice, the company, each location, we treat everyone from 5 years old to 85 years old. 0 to 5 years old, really, that's a very, very specialized type of therapy. But our practice sees, that kind of age range. The interesting thing about children's anxiety is the following. Most kids are anxious because their parents are. But what do I mean by that? Do I mean that their parents are making them anxious? No. What I mean by that is, as parents, we talk about things on a daily basis in our homes with our spouses, and we have our own stress levels, right? Or we talk with our friends or our parents or whatever it is. We have these adult conversations. And kids can't necessarily process those conversations at the rate that they're happening. So I'm going to give you an example of what I mean right now in this pandemic with regard to anxiety and children. Two parents are home trying to figure out how they're going to go to work. Their daughter is going to school Monday, Wednesday, Friday. She doesn't have anybody to watch her Tuesday, Thursday because she's doing online learning. Both parents work in a doctor's office. One is the head of the human resources department and the other one is a receptionist. They both have to go to work. What kind of conversation do you think they're having on a daily basis between the two of them? Probably not a very helpful one or hopeful or anything but stressful. Their stress level is here. This time of year can be stressful for kids anyway. Who's my teacher going to be? Who's in my class this year? Do I need a pencil? Do I need pens? What do I need? All that kind of stuff. There's just, some anxiety going back to school normally. I want you to add that normal stress on top of who's going to watch me, who's going to go to work, how are we going to pay our bills? Are you going to stay home? What's our childcare look like? Who's going to take care of the dog? All these different things get piled onto that conversation. I can tell you I'm a therapist and I have conversations like that with my husband all the time, not realizing my 9-year-old might be sitting there hearing it, right? They're conversations we have to have. I have to talk to my husband about childcare. I have to talk to my husband about who's going to work tomorrow. But what we don't realize is we don't realize that the secondary anxiety that that puts on the kids. So what we see is kids that are coming in saying, I'm anxious about the school year. I'm anxious about my teacher. I'm anxious about the classroom. Well, if I said to my 9-year-old, I am so excited, you get to go to school twice a week this year, and you're going to have these awesome things in front of you so nobody can steal your pencils this year, that's going to be so exciting. I want you to imagine what my 9-year-old's anxiety would be like about school. Probably be 0, right? Oh my gosh, my narrative becomes her narrative. When you start to get to older kids, they're honestly the teen, preteen, young adult, their narrative is their own. But when you've got 10 and under, even 11 and under, their narrative is really indicative of what's going on in their home and what's being talked about. And their parents' narrative is becoming theirs. I can tell you, the way I get my kids to eat Brussels sprouts is to tell them they're the best thing on earth. Even if I have to explain why they're good for your hearing and they're good for your eyesight and they're good for all these things, you get to live a long time if you, right? All these ways that I get my 9-year-old to think Brussels sprouts are great are the same way I get my 9-year-old to think that learning from her computer is great. Same thing. Now, can I tell my 14-year-old that same story about Brussels sprouts? No, he's too smart. He's too advanced, right? Not that my 9-year-old's not smart. He's too advanced. He looks at me and goes, Ma, I don't like them. I'll eat something else. But 10 and under, they don't really do that yet. That's why it's so important to make sure that the conversations we're having, and I'm going to tell you a little anecdote that happened a few years ago in practice. I had an 8-year-old come in with extreme anxiety. She was my personal patient. And we really couldn't figure out why she went from being very, very happy to extreme anxiety. I mean, panic every single night, panic, panic, panic. Panic over somebody's going to break into my house. Panic over, and nothing had happened. Like, so there was no death in her family. There was no one who had been in an accident. There was nothing that would have prompted this level of anxiety. Come to find out, about 6 months into therapy, we were talking about where she goes after school. She goes to grandma's house. Where's your grandmother live? Oh, a couple doors down. What do you do when you go to grandma's house? Well, I usually sit at the table and I do my homework while she watches the news. Watches the what? 5 o'clock every night, this 8-year-old is sitting doing her math homework and grandma is listening to the news. I want you to tell me, if you watched the 5 o'clock news yesterday, what was on it? Anything helpful? Anything hopeful? No. What she was listening to every day at 5 o'clock was murder, was fires, was car accidents, plane crashes. I mean, the weather, there's a tornado coming, we could lose power. I mean, the amount of things this 8-year-old was taking in, hearing in the other room at her grandmother's house was literally causing panic. And one day she was sitting at the table doing her homework and she heard about a little girl who was kidnapped. And all of a sudden she became panicked that she was going to be kidnapped. And her mother brought her into therapy because she had this weird panic about being kidnapped. And no one could figure out where it was coming from. You would be surprised how much the narrative that our children take in becomes their narrative. And just like you can teach them why being on virtual learning is amazing and awesome, you can also teach them why it's horrible and it's going to be awful for our family. Those things are what they take in. So that's really the number one thing I'm seeing with kids is anxiety coming from a narrative that is not positive. And here's the thing, as parents, I can tell you now I know this, I didn't know it then. My mom went through stuff when I was 8 years old and she spun it like it was the best thing in the world. Now looking back at 44, I can tell you it was not the best thing in the world, but she made it seem like it was so that nobody around her was stressed. That's our job as parents. And unfortunately right now, parents are so stressed. Their stress levels here, so their parenting ability is not where it needs to be because their stress level is way over where it should be. parents should not be stressed about going to work and leaving your kids home and have, they shouldn't be, and they are. So what we're doing in our therapy practice is really helping children change that narrative and gain the skill to change that narrative, but also working with the parents to help change the narrative. Okay. Teens, preteens, and young adults. The biggest thing we're seeing is a loss of what they consider quality of life. I can't go to high school. I'm not going to see my friends. I can't play my sport, right? Really big identity issues. And that's hard. I'm going to be honest with you. You have to just let them talk it through, because the only thing to say is, yeah, that's hard. And I'm really sorry you're going through that. You can't put teens in a situation that's not safe. So you can't say, well, I know it's hard, but just go to your friend's house and sleep over. I know everybody else is. We're in a situation in our town where that's how, 6 kids ended up contracting COVID, because they all went down the shore together and none of the parents wanted to say no. I get it. I get it's hard. I get how hard it is. But just like I wouldn't make bad parenting decisions on a Monday, I'm not going to do it in a pandemic either. Just like I wouldn't tell you that it's okay to follow your friends to the bridge and jump off it on Monday, I'm not going to tell you it's okay during a pandemic either. And that's really difficult because, again, parents' stress level is here. Adults and older adult stress level is probably the thing I'm most concerned about. Twofold. Parents, I'm very concerned about parents' stress level right now because of some of the decisions they have to make that are just out of this world. It doesn't make any sense for 2 parents to have to figure out who's going to watch their 5-year-old because their 5-year-old is now learning from a computer. It just doesn't make sense. It's something that even just saying the sentence, it's almost unbelievable that we're in a position to have to even deal with that. When we're working with parents, and many people on this call might have children that have children, or you have grandchildren, what I can tell you is you just need to listen. Just listen to the stress. And the reason why I want you to listen to their stress is because you don't want that stress being put on to their kids. So if they can't get themselves to a therapist to talk about their stress, someone has to be that sounding board. And if they don't have a supportive spouse, someone has to be that sounding board, because they're going through something where they're trying to deal with their own stress and their kids' stress and their basic needs. And so that's a very difficult position to be in. Older adults, my concern there is the isolation. My stepdad was recently in the hospital and then in a nursing home, and the fact that no one could get to him and no one could see him really progressed his dementia, most unfortunately. It was very difficult to watch because we knew that it was happening because no one could be there. And anytime you have someone that has a little bit of dementia and you put them in a foreign place with foreign people, foreign to them, and their family can't be there, the dementia just, really progresses very quick. So I'm glad that people are in nursing homes where they're being cared for, but there are a fair amount of people that are in nursing homes sometimes that are not being cared for, and that's an extra burden on the family. And so those are the kind of things that you want to make sure you're talking to a therapist about. People say to me all the time, what is it going to do? What is talking to a therapist going to do? And I say, well, what is not talking to a therapist doing now? What do you have to lose? Right? It's not like when you go to a therapist, you have to step through some black hole to get there. It's either going to work or it's not. It's either going to be helpful or it's not. I'm in my own therapy. I have been for a really long time. Most therapists are in their own therapy because we deal with other people's stuff, so we're in our own stuff. And I can tell you there's moments where I say, oh, what am I going to talk about today? And then I get on the phone with her because I'm still doing virtual sessions, and I miraculously have a ton to talk about. And I do feel much better after I get off the phone with her. Supportive counseling, it doesn't have to be psychotherapy that's deep into every trauma you've ever been through, but supportive counseling can be super helpful right now. Helpful for older adults who are homebound. We do a lot of phone sessions with older adults right now. And I do a lot of sessions with moms in their car, in their driveway, because that's the 45 minutes they have to get away from their stress. That's 45 minutes in their car that they have that they can just focus on themselves. What is the best approach to take? Oh, hang on. More chat. What is the best approach to take when trying to sell someone on getting kids to go to therapy? Aha. Okay. Well, number one, it'll help you. If you send your kid to therapy, it's going to help you as the parent. Why deal with the stress all on your own? Sometimes a therapist can see something different than you can see it. Sometimes a therapist can see and help you deal with what you're going through at home. As parents, when we're in it, we don't realize the stress level when we're in it. But sometimes when you go to a therapist and a therapist looks at at the mom and goes, this is really stressful for you. I'm sorry you're going through this. I can totally help you. That sentence of I can help you and your child is like a weight lifted off of you. Sometimes therapy doesn't have to be long-term either. Just a few sessions can, like, I didn't see that child that was having that severe panic for a long time. I saw her for maybe 12 sessions. We got to what it was in terms of the, her listening to the news every night, and miraculously all of it went away. Didn't take long, did it? So sometimes little tweaks here and there. But the one thing I think works with parents the most is saying, it'll help you help them. Does that make sense? Okay, so here's what to do if you're an older adult and you're feeling isolated. Get yourself on the phone. Get yourself on FaceTime. Get your nose in a book and get 4,000 miles away in Fiji. Take a walk through your neighborhood. Meet your neighbors. Sometimes we have people around us that we don't even think we have around us, and miraculously they show up when we need them. Your grandchildren can definitely teach you how to FaceTime. Their grandkids are super good at that. Is anyone feeling isolated and they have no options? Okay. So is it that you don't have options to call people and you don't have options to, or that you don't have physical options? Stress of, okay, let's see. Stress of being afraid to go back to school and being blamed by parents for not wanting to teach. Oh my goodness. Let's talk about radical acceptance and non-judgmental approach. You are not responsible for people's opinion of you. I'm going to say it again. You are not responsible for people's opinion of you. One of the things I have to say that I have done during this pandemic is I have hopped myself off of Facebook. Off. I don't want to know what people's opinion is of teachers right now. I don't want to know what people's opinion is of anything because I didn't ask for their opinion. So if you're a teacher and you're feeling like you don't want to be blamed for something, how can you distance yourself from someone else's opinion of you? That's one of the things I have to say. That's not really an easy answer, is it? That's not really a sort of a cut and dry question and answer. If I have a very good friend of mine who's a teacher, she's in therapy. Why? Because her stress level is through the roof right now. Is her therapist changing what's happening? No. Is her therapist helping her through what's happening? Yes. I can't change what's happening in our culture with regard to teachers, but I can absolutely support you through it. I can absolutely help you through it. And I can absolutely help you process your anxiety around it. But I can't change the actual situation. And if you don't talk to someone about it, about your stress level, that's when that anxiety starts to creep up to become acute stress. I think that's probably the number one reason why talk therapy is so important. Was that helpful to the person that asked that question? Good. I'm telling you, one of the worst things that's happening right now is Facebook. I hate to say that because I love to connect with people and I love to see their kids and I love to see the sports they're playing and I love all that kind of stuff. But I can't take the judgments. I can't imagine that there's people right now that are just spewing their opinion of something they literally absolutely nothing about. And that's stress on top of stress, right? Because you're stressed and you're feeling a certain way, and then you're taking in information about that too. So just be really careful about what goes in here. Okay. How can we best recognize and support others who may be experiencing stress right? So you'll notice, I can tell you there's a couple things that, couple ways that I know somebody's really stressed. And if you're in a conversation with someone and they start talking about their stress, they're really stressed. Okay. So I'll give you an example. I go into work and one of our receptionists, I say, just in passing, hey, how's it going? Oh my gosh, it's horrible. Just horrible day. Oh, why is it a horrible day? Oh my gosh, my daughter's got to come home from college. I don't know how I'm going to get her out of her dorm. She's got to find a place to live. I don't even know if they're going to give us back any of our deposit. It's just this whole thing. And do you see what I'm doing with my hand right now? Right? This whole thing is it's just so stressful. Like, I just don't know what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? Like, I'm at my wit's end. That's a person who's stressed. I want you to go back through your week in your head and think about the conversations you've had with people. And there's people that were uplifting and they were like, oh my gosh, this is so strange, isn't it? I just don't even know what to do anymore. The masks and everything. And they're not stressed. But the person that just looked like I just looked, they're stressed, right? They're not having a normal conversation. Like when you say to someone, how's your day going? And they say, oh, great. A little bit of stress at home today, but nothing big. That's a normal conversation at work, right? Ending up like this in the middle of a conversation at work is not normal. And so you can definitely tell. I mean, I can tell you people I've had conversations with that I've literally said, have you talked to your therapist today? Talked to your therapist lately? And the amount of people that have said, oh, no, I haven't actually. I kind of fell off and I just never called her back. And I'm like, you should call her. You should call him, right? So, and help and say, gosh, you really seem stressed. Is there anything I can do to help you? And I'm telling you, I know my friends that see therapists, and I have no problem saying, did you see your therapist lately? What does your therapist say about that? Did you talk to your therapist today? Did you talk to your therapist last week? How are your kids doing? What's your husband say? People who can be kind to themselves and accept the circumstances handle stress better. We tend to judge ourselves and criticize ourselves for not doing better. More self-love. Yes, more self-love. Non-judgmental, frustration tolerance, radical acceptance. You're good enough. You are good enough the way you are. I promise. Was this helpful for everyone? Good, good. And I can't stress enough, there are really, really good therapists out there. And I promise it's not as hard as it seems. And so if you've ever thought about getting into therapy, or you know someone that needs to get into therapy, the conversation sounds like this. I think it might really help. I don't know how it's going to help, but what do you have to lose? So yes, there are also good, very good group therapy sessions. We have group therapy sessions that are focused on trauma and stress and focused on just the pandemic. We have group therapy sessions that are focused on parenting during the pandemic. What I found most of the time with parents is they have a harder time coming in, so they rather would do the phone sessions because they're with their kids 24/7 right now, and they can't really get away from the house to do that. But the group sessions are really helpful. You know, and there's social distancing in our offices and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's just hard right now. This is hard. This is nothing we've been through before. This is not charted territory by any stretch of the imagination. So it's important that we support each other, and it's important that we reach out and get the help that we need. And it's not necessarily help that's abnormal. It's help like, hey, I want to talk about what's going on because it's so out of this world, right? I mean, this is out of this world. It's almost unbelievable. And sometimes as a therapist, I sit there with my clients and go, this is unbelievable. And they go, it is unbelievable. And we go, yeah, we can't believe we're going through this, right? And there's some connected tissue to that, connectedness to that, you know, that, yeah, man, even as a therapist, I can't imagine that we're doing this. So we can open it up to questions now if anybody has any questions. And sometimes at this point in the presentation or at this point in the conversation, it's just really helpful that the information was applicable to you or to someone you know. So please don't feel like you have to have any questions or anything like that. Sometimes it's just really important to hear. And sometimes it's just really important information to have. And like I said, I'm a huge advocate for therapy, and I'm a huge advocate for reaching out when we need help. Even if it's, you know, your pastor, your church, anything like that, any type of support is good. All right, for parents, let's see, for parents whose kids are not living with them, how can you help them at a distance? And then thank you for this because it really helped me to understand that what I am experiencing is normal. Yes, 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 yes. So kids that are living at a distance. A very good friend of mine has an adult child. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about. She lives in Wisconsin. And she actually met up with her halfway. So she drove like halfway out there, and the daughter drove halfway, and they kind of spent the weekend, and she felt like it was important. But, you know, I think the other thing to remember is that we've raised our kids to be resilient. I don't know that we've raised them for a pandemic, but we've raised them to be resilient. And kids, especially young adults, they have a struggle anyway that they're in a part of their life that's difficult. And now they're in a part of their life that's difficult, that's also difficult, right? So you're 20 something years old and you're going through a pandemic, and, you know, you're dating online, and there's a lack, there's isolation, and there's all these different things that kind of go along with it. The most important thing to know is there's just no possible way this is forever. Even if we have a new normal, there's just no possible way this is forever. And so even if we stay with masks for the rest of our lives, we will get used to those masks. Even if my kids distance learn for the rest of their lives, they'll get used to distance learning. Even if I'm on teletherapy for the rest of my career, I'll get used to it. I may not like it, but eventually my narrative will have to change that this is my new normal. And so 2 things. Number 1, this isn't forever. And number 2, if it is, it'll be okay. Those words, it'll be okay, are the most important thing I think you can ever say to someone. It'll be okay no matter how this turns out, because you're strong enough to handle whatever happens. And if you don't believe it, you need to say it to yourself enough times so that you do believe it. And that's why talk therapy works. Because the more you speak out loud that you're resilient, the more you speak out loud that you've survived worse than this, the more you will survive it. Positive psychology isn't just positive psychology. Positive psychology is literally the...
Thanks on you.
Positive psychology is literally the act of pulling yourself out of a crappy narrative, right? And I say that because, like, that's really what it is. This is horrible. This is awful. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. You can. I can't wear a mask anymore. I can't do this anymore. Yes, you can. That word, yes, you can, is positive psychology. It doesn't change the situation. It doesn't go, oh, it's not really a pandemic. It doesn't sugarcoat anything. It doesn't tell you it's not bad. It just says, yes, you can.
Okay, do we have any other questions for Kelly?
You're welcome.
Kelly, tell us a little bit about your business, where you're located, and
Sure.
what people would expect who may have never experienced therapy before.
Sure. So we have 3 locations, actually 4 locations: Wayne, Hackettstown, Sparta, and Denville. We've been in business for about 7-8 years now. And all of our therapists see any, children through adults. We do have some therapists that specialize in substance use issues. But we, just a couple therapists that do that. But sometimes we have some patients that come in with mental health and substance abuse. We also work really closely with some of the school districts to do mental health programs and mental health assessment for children in the districts. What you would expect if you came to one of our locations is we're going to match you with a therapist that specializes in what you're coming in for and kind of meets the needs that you have. So we have a number of therapists on staff, which the best part about that is that we make sure to match you with a therapist that really meets your needs. We get you an appointment within the same week, usually, if not, the next couple days later. We take all insurances and we do all the billing. So the only thing you really have to do is call, give your information and insurance, and we set you up with an appointment. It's painless, I promise. The first session is really just getting to know your therapist. And our therapists do a really great job of just making sure that that they're there for you, whatever it is that you need to work through. They're skilled in whatever it is that you bring to the table. We do individual work, family work, group work. And it's a great experience. I've had people say that, the therapist really changed the trajectory of their family and, really helped them come out of a very bad place in their life. So it's very rewarding to hear that. And the work we do is really important. So if you do want to make an appointment, we have a central intake actually. And so it's one phone number that you call, and the intake coordinator matches you with a therapist in whatever location you want to go to. So you don't have to call each separate location. And it's a super easy number. It's 691-3030, extension 1. And, you know, Mo will take care of you. One of the things I know about being in mental health for a really long time is the process can be really difficult, and we don't want it to be difficult. We want it to be the easiest thing you've done all day. We want to remove all the barriers, financial, you know, everything. Everything just needs to be pushed out of the way so that you can get what you need out of it.
Okay. Kelly, thank you.
You're welcome.
This
My pleasure.
was really perfect. It's timely. You're a true professional. Everybody
Thanks.
learned an awful lot. And thank you. We wish you well, your family, your clients, and you're right. I like what you said. It will get better, and things will turn out just fine. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I
And just
appreciate it.
someone had just asked about the phone number again. It was 691-3030. But you can also just go on the web and search up Tri-County Behavioral Care and you'll find us.
Okay. Good night,
Thanks,
all.
everyone.
Thanks a bunch. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
I guess everybody's going.